All right. So that brings us very well to your third point here. You kind of covered two. The Democrats' ambitions, and you got a lot of pushback on this. The Democrats' ambitions are significantly more dangerous than those of the Republicans. From digital surveillance to censorship to making intel and enforcement agencies central players in domestic governance, all plans being executed globally as well as in our one country. They are thinking on a much bigger and more dangerous scale than Republicans. I lived in third world countries, and the endless criminal indictments of people like Trump and ongoing lawfare efforts to prevent even third-party challenges are classic authoritarian symptoms. The Republicans aren't near this kind of capability. Now, you got a lot of reaction, people talking about the Supreme Court obviously being in conservative hands, Republican actions against abortion rights in states that they control.
Big one. Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm.
So on what level do you feel that the Republicans don't really have institutional power to enact their will? Because in a lot of areas, they are enacting their will, particularly through the courts and particularly in the legislatures of states they control.
Yeah, well, maybe it's because I've spent so much time on this one issue that I view it this way. But I've been looking at, for instance, there have been a whole slew of new legal advocacy organizations that have been lavishly funded by kind of the Reid Hoffmans and Craig Newmarks of the world. And their entire existence is to take aim at constitutional protections that they think will help Donald Trump survive politically. Just to take an example, there's this thing called the 65 Project, right? Which involves David Brock. He's the former self-confessed Republican hitman, and it's, got an army of lawyers attached to it. A lot of them used to work for the Justice Department. And the goal of the project is to file ethics complaints against every lawyer who represented Trump after the 2020 election and all of those lawsuits. Now, for me, looking at that, like, that's about 6 or 7 different things that I was taught were wrong as a young, like, Massachusetts liberal. Like, for one thing, it's like identifying the person before the crime. We're going to find an ethics complaint to file against every single one of those people. It's guilt by association. It's blaming lawyers for who the identities of their clients. And then it's also, there's this larger thing which gets to the bigger issue, which I think is more important to me, which is just discouraging people from having an attorney generally, right? It may not be exactly a Sixth Amendment violation, but to take a related case, like I interviewed somebody because of something I found in the Twitter files. I interviewed a person who was a defendant for being at January 6th and was trying to raise money for himself on one of the internet fundraising sites, and ended up being discouraged from doing it thanks to a combination of pressure from USA Today and a bunch of these advocacy groups, which were full of these ex-DOJ types. Now, this is somebody who was trying to raise money for his own criminal defense, right? And we have people who used to work in the Justice Department trying to prevent that from happening. And that, to me, is really scary, right? And we see this all across the board, whether it's, the speech rights. Obviously, we saw a ton of that with the Twitter files, but then there's also stuff like the financial surveillance. It's, with the Treasury Department scanning purchase codes for things like, did this person shop at Cabela's? Did they buy Bibles? Did they go to gun shops? I don't want the government doing that kind of stuff. There's due process issues with a lot of the Trump cases. There's the very, very aggressive and proud use of extremely draconian laws like the Espionage Act and the Klan Act, against which there's very little defense, really. And there's this constant bragging about using resources to try to discourage people from defending themselves. I mean, Brock was in the 65 Project was talking about how this was going to affect the littler fish more because this is their livelihoods, and they have reputations in their communities they want to protect. That's using money and press connections to try to discourage somebody, again, from hiring a lawyer, right? And I understand that they think, and they may even be right, that these lawyers were filing frivolous lawsuits, but we depend on the system to reject those lawsuits. And we want people to have, even our worst enemies, to have good lawyers, because we don't want their convictions overturned. I mean, this is like a core liberal principle. I mean, it was something that even 5 years ago wouldn't have been controversial. And I just see this up and down the board with these efforts. It's the openness and the pride with which this is being done that scares the hell out of me. And, the Republicans, yes, they do a lot of things that are crazy and irrational. I mean, there was one of the anti-trans laws that, would have given people power to report kids who, showed evidence of non-traditional gender behavior or something like that.
Right.
That was a South Carolina law, I think, and that's crazy. Yeah, I agree. But the Constitution, if you succeed in hollowing that out, there's no going back. It's over at that point. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're making a all rights are downstream of the First Amendment argument. But didn't we also see, as soon as a war broke out involving Israel, that a lot of people who claim to be free speech absolutists or advocates like Ben Shapiro, like Barry Weiss, all of a sudden flipped on a dime? Bill Ackman, all of these people turned around and demonstrated they're perfectly willing to be censorious if the issue is something where they feel that they want to suppress free speech.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's kind of my point, is that when anybody succeeds in kind of breaking down the constitutional protection, it's going to be misused in whatever direction later. You can't count on it always being on your side. I think in the Trump context, that you just see so many different things that are like precedent-setting actions that could be used in another direction incredibly easily if somebody else were to come to power. This idea of this Supreme Court case now on the speech stuff. I think they're going to rule against the plaintiffs, the people that I'm kind of aligned with there. And when they do that, they're going to give the government explicit permission to really go hog wild on monitoring and suppressing the internet, and all that power is going to redound to whoever wins the presidency next time, and that could be Donald Trump. And Trump, I think, has learned his lesson, of not. He was a little bit lazy last time and not aggressively using all the powers of the executive branch, and he's not going to make that mistake this time, which is why I think people should pay more attention to this.
Well, Project 2025, there's a lot of talk about that. And I'm kind of two minds about it. On the one hand, Trump was undoubtedly thwarted by the permanent bureaucracy, the deep state. No doubt they acted against the rights of the executive to set certain policies. So there is a justification for removing these bureaucrats. But I think what we've seen is when they replace them with their own, you're just going to have the same problem with a different flavor. I think that's what we've really seen post October 7th. Yeah, and yes, they'll use the groundwork the Democrats laid down, but we'll very quickly see that our free speech allies, in many cases, you have some legitimately principled people, but I think most of them will just flip to pushing their own censorship, won't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd have to say I'm a little bit more in favor of the executive having the ability to remove people from executive branch positions. Part of that is my experience living in post-communist Russia, where the old nomenclature never really left. I mean, that's kind of there is a problem when you have a permanent bureaucracy that they're the only people who really know how to operate the machinery, and that's why they stay forever, and they accrue enormous amounts of power, and that can be a problem. And that's one of the reasons why I want the presidential election to be meaningful. I want, if people have ideas about how they want there to be a change in how the CIA or the DIA or whatever operates, I'd like to be that to be a possibility. But I think the more important thing though is ending this idea of making all the civil society organizations that are designed to protect us against constitutional abuses. They've all been like absorbed by these deeply partisan organizations, and that's a real problem for me. Like, the ACLU, to which I gave money my entire life, I think was an incredibly important institution in America for a really long time, because it was willing to take on cases for everybody, even people they couldn't stand. And that created a check on power. Same thing with the media. The media has to have that same separateness, or else it's useless. And that's been a big part of my critique of sort of both left and right media, but more particularly the mainstream press, which is it's indistinguishable to me from part of the Democratic Party apparatus, and you can't have that. The press is useless if you do that. Among other things, it has no institutional authority once it does that, and that's what I worry about. I think we need. Chris Hedges wrote this book. I think it's called the Death of the Liberal Class, and it was all about the hollowing out of these institutions, and that has a tremendously damaging effect on society. When
the editor we were talking about a little bit, Yuri Berliner at NPR, just dropped an article that's making a lot of waves, saying, they did this big push towards identity diversity and no push towards viewpoint diversity. So as the identities became more diverse, the viewpoints became less diverse, until now. He referenced a poll saying 3 in 10 NPR listeners find NPR trustworthy. That's the result of that. There's people who listen to it.
Right, which and then that what does that tell you about the percentage
about everyone else?
All right, I think the news organizations have long made a mistake in understanding the nature of their own power and their own profitability. In order for people to see in order for the media to be effective, it has to be seen as independent. Otherwise, people will just say, well, why am I listening to you? Why don't I just listen to, the government spokesperson, which incidentally, I think is part of the dynamic that is leading stations like MSNBC to hire Jen Psaki and Nicole Wallace, right? They figured, why don't we just cut to the chase and just, hire the person instead of pretending to be journalists?
Well, their audience already loves them.
What?
Their audience already loves them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But but over time, though, see, here's the thing. I disagree with that. Over time, what happens is, even if somebody feeds you the partisan stuff that you think you like, if they don't show some kind of independence in a critical moment, you will see through them and you will not listen to them. I think we saw that with the conservative press when Trump ran in 2016. There was a moment where they all kind of rose as one and said, we're going to stop Donald Trump. There was a big thing in the National Review, I think,
Yeah, I
where
remember
it's like,
that.
yeah, and everyone's like, yeah, whatever, because you've been a tool for these interests for so long. Why should we listen to you now when a guy who's running and calling you people tools, is a threat to win the presidency? That's why you got to be careful about getting in bed with anybody. It's just, I mean, you know what I mean. But that's the problem. And then the whole thing about viewpoint diversity. Yeah, absolutely. I knew that was a problem in other newsrooms as well. I heard a lot of rumblings during the Floyd protests about that. It just doesn't work if you only show people one thing over and over again. They will tune you out eventually.
Hey, there's still tickets available in Stockholm, Oslo, Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Cortland, New York, Oakmont, Pennsylvania, El Paso, Texas, San Antonio, Texas, Edmonton, Alberta, Vancouver, British Columbia, Denver, Ashland, Virginia, and Athens, Georgia. See you there.